In my last couple of videos, we've talked about suppressing trauma and how a lot of us choose that because we don't want to deal with the trauma of our past, but how it can lead to a lot of negative side effects in our present. And we talked a little about suppressing sadness and fear and things like that. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about suppressing dysfunction as a whole. So one of the things that sets us off, that actually creates trauma-based disorders and issues within our lives, is when we recognize that what happened to us was actually traumatic. So, for instance, if someone grows up in a situation that is traumatic, but they've gotten so used to it that it feels normal to them, these traumatic things can't actually traumatize them. They can impact them in a lot of very negative ways that I'll talk about in a second, but it can't actually produce the PTSD-like symptoms that we've talked about in previous videos. So, for instance, for me and my friends, when we were over in Afghanistan, being over there, it kind of started to feel normal for us. We were there for like 8 months. It became very common for us to go out to take fire, to have to deal with casualties, to have to deal with patrols and constant aggression and constant alertness during our given situation. That actually coming back to America in and of itself was traumatic because the peacetime was what we weren't used to. And as we were talking to people, we were speaking of our experiences in ways that it seemed like everything was totally normal to us. I didn't see anything weird about the stories that I was sharing with other people. I thought they were funny. I would tell stories of people getting shot. I would tell stories of myself getting shot. I would tell stories of people getting killed, blown up, things like that. And I wouldn't really think it was weird. I just thought that was normal because I had lived in that situation for so long. It seemed normal to me. Not only did it seem normal to me because of the length of time I spent there, it also seemed normal to me because of my peer group that was with me also saw those things as normal. No one really seemed to think of it as weird in the environment that I was in. It only became weird when I came home and I started sharing these experiences with people that's not their normal. And it was because of that I started to realize, maybe the things that I did, maybe the things that I've been around weren't normal. Maybe that stuff was really messed up. The same could be true for someone who grows up in a traumatic environment. So if you grow up and you're subject to physical, even emotional or sexual abuse throughout your life, you might grow up thinking that that's completely normal. You might think that every family is like that because whatever environment you grow up in, you assume that everybody else is like you. It takes a while for you to grow up and develop and realize, oh my gosh, like not everybody is like me. And that could be the trigger that's going to make you think and feel like, oh my gosh, like something wrong has happened to me. The way that we fight that is by turning off that dysfunction altogether. So in other words, what you have to tell yourself is you have to tell yourself, what happened to me actually wasn't weird. What happened to me actually wasn't dysfunctional. Now, if you're able to do this, once again, you will steer clear of the PTSD-like symptoms that we've talked about in previous videos. However, this side effect might be the most severe one of any of the ones that we've talked about previously. What will happen to you is if you say that trauma is normal and lack of trauma is abnormal, what you're going to do is you're going to actively pursue dysfunction because that's what makes you feel the most at ease. So for instance, a lot of my friends, the reason why they continued to stay in the military even though they hated it, the reason why they continued to do deployments even though they were so terrible, is because in a weird way that had become normal to them. Those of you guys who have family members who are veterans, you might have seen this, where they almost want to go back to deployment status. Even though they complain about it and tell you how horrible it is, it's almost like they're longing for it, where the war actually seems more comfortable to them and peacetime seems more debilitating or traumatic for them. The reason why is because they've incorporated that trauma, but in order to deny it, they have to tell themselves that what they've been through wasn't actually traumatic, but normal. So they're seeking out the dysfunction because the alternative is to admit that what they went through was bad and then to be traumatized by it, and they don't want to do that. Similarly, people who've grown up in abusive childhoods, they might actually seek out abusive people. It's very weird to us, but you would think that someone who grew up with an abusive parent would naturally seek out people who are more calm and less abusive, and some people do, don't get me wrong, But these people that are denying trauma, they might actually seek out someone that is exactly like their abusive parent. Why? Because they don't want to believe that their childhood was actually abusive. They don't want to deal with the repercussions of admitting that to themselves and to others. And so because they're trying to live in this fog of believing that they had a happy childhood or a normal childhood or a normal relationship or a happy relationship, they actually pursue and seek out a similarly dysfunctional relationship in order to make them feel calm. They might actually even intake some of the dysfunctional behavior from their childhood and start to use it. So maybe someone from a dysfunctional or abusive childhood may not find an abuser, but they might become abusive themselves. The reason why is because, again, they're acting out the dysfunction that's become normal to them. Well, what's the alternative? Like I said, the alternative is to acknowledge that what happened to you was traumatic and deal with the repercussions, which is not an easy thing to do. So that's why a lot of times people will try to do this and they'll immediately revert back. Meaning that they're going to try to say, like, oh my gosh, like maybe what I went through was bad, and then they're going to try to deal with that trauma, but they'll find out it's too intense, it's too difficult for them, and they'll just revert back to their dysfunction. So for me, that was definitely a temptation for me. You know, coming back to peacetime and learning how to deal with peacetime was not easy, and as weird as it may sound, there was a part of me that wanted to go back to the dysfunction. You know, I remember after post-deployment leave, so after you get back from deployment, you go home. And I remember after post-deployment leave of spending a month with my family, I was almost longing to go back to the Marine Corps, which is weird because, again, just a couple weeks earlier, I was longing to be with my family. I hated the Marine Corps. I hated being in that dysfunctional organization. But being back in the Marines gave me an odd sense of safety. It gave me a sense of peace or stability. And the reason why is because that dysfunctional environment had become normal to me, which is not good. So for those of you guys who, again, if you find yourself continuously going into the same environments, continuously seeking out dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional people, if you're looking at your childhood or your past, which is clearly dysfunctional, and you're trying to justify it or making excuses for the people who have abused you or done wrong things to you, you need to really take a step back and ask yourself this question: has abuse or trauma become my normal? And am I willing to admit that this wasn't good? Am I willing to call it for what it is and deal with the repercussions? Because the alternative, as I said, is much more damaging than actually choosing to process these things in a normal and natural way. Another thing that can happen, I'll say this very quickly before I end the video, another thing that can happen to you is maybe you won't seek out the dysfunction, maybe you won't do these other very negative things that I've said, but maybe at the bare bones what you're going to do is you're going to compartmentalize the dysfunction. You're going to tell yourself that it wasn't as dysfunctional as you think it is, or as other people think it is. So once again, you'll make excuses for these people, and you may even reconcile with people that are abusive or horrible to you and allow yourself to be abused, allow yourself to be in relationships where you're mistreated, or allow people that you care about to be around people that are dysfunctional and abusive because you've been unwilling to deal with your own past. So once again, I'm not saying that this is easy for people who are continuously going after that dysfunction. To those of you guys who may be watching family members or friends continuously go after environments and relationships that are harmful or even abusive towards them, it might be very odd for you to see this. It might be very odd for you to understand why someone would choose that for themselves. I'm hoping this gives you a framework to understand why they're doing it. It's not because they like the abuse, it's because they don't like the feeling of uncomfortableness that comes from leaving their version of normal. All you could really do if you're someone who you look inside and you realize that I'm doing this, all you can do is begin to, like I said, try to process what you've gone through, try to deal with it in a healthy way using some of the tools that we'll talk about in future videos. But for right now, try to talk to people about this. Try to get it out there. Try to find a counselor or a therapist or just friends and family. Talk to them about your trauma. Don't just keep burying it. And if you are a family member or a friend of someone who's doing these negative patterns, please talk to these people. Please try to show them in the most loving way possible that what they're doing is not healthy for them. Don't be impatient with them. Don't make fun of them. Don't debilitate them because you think that what they're doing is so crazy. But honestly, come alongside them and try to help them understand how unbelievably damaging their behavior is. So look forward to my next video where I'm going to talk about silencing guilt. But I do hope that these things have been a blessing to you guys. I'll talk to you later. Hey, this is Peter Martin, and if you've just finished this video, that means that you've watched one in a longer playlist on my new book called Fellowship of Suffering. This book deals with trauma and PTSD and how these things impact all of us. So if you've liked this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to my channel, and look forward to more content.